A Boeing 747-8's tanks hold 63,000 gallons, enough to drive a car around the Earth dozens of times. On almost every flight it makes, it takes off with nowhere near that much. Roughly 100,000 flights fly each day, and a dispatcher runs this calculation before everyone. But airlines aren't being cheap, so why doesn't just fill it up ever happen? And what's actually being calculated instead? The answer involves a weight problem that compounds on itself, a landing gear limit almost no passenger has heard of, and a regulation written in the wreckage of two disasters. One where an airliner ran out of fuel over Canada, one where 73 people died over a single word nobody said. At the center of flight planning is a fundamental law of physics. Fuel has mass, and mass requires energy to move. Jet fuel has an operational density of approximately 0.8 kilograms per liter. Because 1 US gallon equals 3.785 liters, a single gallon of jet fuel weighs roughly 3.03 kilograms, or 6.7 pounds. For a large wide-body aircraft like the Boeing 747-8, which has a maximum fuel capacity of approximately 63,000 gallons, filling the tanks to the absolute limit adds over 422,000 pounds of weight directly to the wings. Across a global network operating roughly 100,000 flights every single day, managing this weight is a system-scale calculation. The professional responsible for this calculation is the aircraft dispatcher. Working in airline operations centers, dispatchers process thousands of data points to generate the legal flight release. They must account for the exact distance of the route, predicted wind components, altitude restrictions, and the dry operating weight of the airframe. On any given day, scheduled airlines log roughly 100,000 flights, meaning this calculation is performed at a massive, system-wide scale before every single departure. Why not simply fill the tanks to ensure a wide safety margin on every departure? The answer lies in the compounding penalty of carrying unneeded weight. Consider a concrete operational example. If a dispatcher loads an extra 1,000 gallons of fuel in excess of what is required for the mission, they are adding 3,028 kilograms, or 6,700 pounds, of dead weight to the takeoff profile. This extra mass does not ride for free. To carry those 6,700 pounds across a long-haul flight, the engines must burn a portion of that very fuel, just to overcome the added aerodynamic drag and gravity. This burn penalty typically consumes 3 to 5% of the carried mass for every hour of flight. Over a 10-hour route, a significant fraction of that extra fuel is expended merely to transport itself. Carrying fuel costs fuel. Under structural takeoff weight ceilings, this mass penalty creates an immediate operational conflict. Every pound of unnecessary fuel directly displaces a pound of revenue-generating payload, whether that is passengers, baggage, or commercial cargo. Unneeded fuel becomes lost revenue. Yet even when cargo holds are empty and fuel prices are low, airlines still refuse to fill their tanks to capacity. Why does the aviation industry maintain this strict operational discipline even when the direct carrying cost of the fuel is not a financial factor? The answer lies in a structural constraint that surprises almost everyone. Takeoff weight is not landing weight. Why are these two limits so drastically different? During takeoff, the wings gradually lift the weight of the aircraft, distributing the load smoothly across the structure. Touchdown is the exact opposite. The landing gear and wing spars must suddenly absorb the immense kinetic energy of impact, meaning the airframe is designed for a much lighter landing envelope. Building landing gear strong enough to routinely handle a maximum weight touchdown would require heavy reinforced materials, adding permanent dead weight that would severely degrade flight efficiency. To resolve this engineering challenge, manufacturers certify two distinct limits: the maximum takeoff weight and the significantly lower maximum landing weight. Consider the passenger version of the Boeing 777-300ER. This long-haul airliner has a certified maximum takeoff weight of 775,000 pounds. Yet its maximum landing weight is capped at just 554,000 pounds. The gap between these two figures is a staggering 221,000 pounds. To make this scale intuitive, that weight difference alone is greater than a fully loaded Boeing 737-800. How does this massive deficit influence real-world flight operations? At a typical cruise burn rate of approximately 15,500 pounds of fuel per hour, A fully loaded 700 and 300 ER requires more than 13 hours of flight time just to shed enough mass to land legally. If a mechanical issue or medical emergency occurs shortly after departure, the captain faces an immediate dilemma. The aircraft is simply too heavy to land safely. Extra fuel is not just a carrying cost, it is a structural commitment. A long-range jet departing with full tanks cannot easily return to Earth. On January 14, 2020, Delta Airlines Flight 89, a Boeing 777-200, took off from Los Angeles International Airport bound for Shanghai. Minutes into the climb, the crew declared an emergency due to a compressor stall in the right engine, forcing an immediate return. Because the jet had just departed on a trans-Pacific voyage, its weight far exceeded its maximum landing limit. To quickly shed mass, the crew jettisoned approximately 15,000 gallons, nearly 100,000 pounds, of fuel. However, because the aircraft was at a low altitude, the fuel did not fully vaporize. Instead, a mist of raw jet fuel rained down over Cudahy, California, coating school playgrounds and injuring dozens of children and adults on the ground, an event that eventually resulted in a $79 million settlement. What makes fuel dumping such a challenging operational choice? Jettison systems are designed to release fuel at high altitudes, where the liquid can atomize and evaporate safely into the atmosphere. When a low-altitude emergency prevents a climb, dumping becomes a high-stakes decision. Yet, for the vast majority of commercial flights, dumping is physically impossible. Why do narrow-body aircraft lack this capability? Short to medium-range airliners, such as the Boeing 737 and Airbus A320 families, are built without dump valves because their maximum takeoff and landing weights are relatively close. On a typical Boeing 737-800, the gap is only 22,500 pounds, a margin easily managed compared to wide-body jets. Without this hardware, a crew facing an immediate return must either hold to burn off fuel or accept an overweight touchdown, which requires a specialized mandatory maintenance inspection under Title 14 of the Code of Federal Regulations. Ultimately, carrying more fuel than a flight absolutely needs introduces a hidden risk. Fuller tanks can make an urgent return harder at exactly the wrong moment. The final constraint on a flight's fuel load is determined by the International Rulebook, rather than the metal of the airframe. How do operators define the margin of safety before an aircraft starts its engines? Under the global framework of ICAO Annex 6, adopted into FAA and EASA regulations, every commercial flight plan must construct a legally mandated minimum fuel load. This calculation is a highly structured sequence of 5 distinct blocks: taxi fuel, trip fuel, contingency fuel, alternate fuel, and final reserve fuel. First, taxi fuel covers the burn from engine start to the takeoff runway. Trip fuel is the calculated consumption to reach the destination under forecast conditions. Next is contingency fuel, designed to absorb unexpected route deviations. Legally, this must be the greater of 5% of the total trip fuel, or the fuel required to hold for 5 minutes at 1,500 feet. If weather or traffic blocks a landing, alternate fuel provides enough burn to climb, cruise, and descend to a designated backup airport. Finally, the foundation of the calculation is the final reserve fuel. For turbine-powered aircraft, this is a non-negotiable 30 minutes of holding at 1,500 feet. Who ensures this calculation matches reality on any given day? The aircraft dispatcher constantly rebuilds this floor using real-time winds aloft, current weather patterns, air traffic control restrictions, and live alternate airport statuses. This is a rigid, legal floor. The primary risk being managed is running low, not carrying extra. How did these precise formulas become an unyielding legal mandate? The modern reserve floor was not designed in a vacuum. It was forged through critical operational failures. On July 23, 1983, Air Canada Flight 143, a Boeing 767-200, ran completely out of fuel at 41,000 feet. During Canada's transition to the metric system, a ground crew used an incorrect conversion factor of 1.77 pounds per liter instead of 0.803 kilograms per liter, loading only half the required fuel weight. The crew executed a 19-minute dead stick glide to a safe landing at a decommissioned military runway in Gimli, Manitoba. The math had failed on the ground, but the airframe's aerodynamics saved the passengers. 7 years later, another tragedy exposed a different vulnerability: communication. On January 25, 1990, Avianca Flight 52, a Boeing 707-321B, entered prolonged holding patterns over New York due to severe weather. As the minutes ticked away, the crew informed controllers they could not accept further delays, but they never used the industry's critical trigger phrase, fuel emergency. Because of this verbal ambiguity, air traffic controllers did not grasp the critical state of the aircraft. The Boeing 707 exhausted its usable fuel and crashed on Long Island, resulting in 73 fatalities. How does the industry prevent such catastrophic misunderstandings today? The disaster at Cove Neck transformed pilot-to-controller phraseology. Today, regulations like FAA Order 7110.65 and ICAO Annex 6 mandate explicit, standardized declarations. When fuel levels threaten the legal reserve, pilots must state minimum fuel, or Mayday fuel, removing all subjective interpretation from the cockpit and control tower. Safety margins are written in the aftermath of survival. How do operators reconcile the competing forces of structural weight, economic penalties, and safety mandates? They use a calculation where every kilogram is justified. The regulatory reserve structure establishes a non-negotiable floor to protect the flight from historical failures. Above this floor, dispatch planning software determines the ceiling, ensuring the airliner avoids the compounding penalty of dead weight. Every extra pound of fuel burns fuel just to carry itself, displacing payload. Fuel planning is a precise calculation of carrying exactly what the mission requires, plus the legal safety margin. Airlines do not fly with full tanks because precision is the ultimate safety margin. Subscribe to the channel for more technical insights into modern aviation. How do these historical rules and airframe limits translate into the daily decisions made by airlines? The complete accident reports, federal regulations, and official safety studies cited so far are linked in the description below for further technical reading. But the legal reserve is only the starting point. How do operators calculate the dynamic margins above this regulatory floor? Moving from historical benchmarks to active dispatch operations requires looking at how modern software, evolving international policies, and aircraft performance models calculate the exact fuel needed for the next flight. How do airlines balance economic efficiency when fuel prices differ between airports? They use a practice known as tankering, carrying extra fuel from a cheaper origin to avoid buying more expensive fuel at the destination. While financially logical, this practice introduces a severe physical penalty. Because fuel has mass, hauling that extra weight burns a significant portion of the savings while emitting unnecessary carbon dioxide. In 2019, a BBC Panorama investigation brought this quiet industry practice into public view, revealing that British Airways tankering operations alone generated roughly 18,000 tons of extra carbon dioxide in a single year, sometimes to save as little as 10 to 50 pounds per flight. In response to the scrutiny, parent company International Airlines Group initiated a formal review of its fueling policies. This tension between cost and carbon eventually reached regulators. The European Union's Refuel EU Aviation Initiative introduced strict anti-tankering clauses, requiring airlines to uplift at least 90% of their yearly required fuel directly from EU departure airports. Above the safety floor, optimization remains a contested space. In October 2022, the European Union Aviation Safety Agency overhauled its fuel regulations, introducing a performance-based framework. Under this policy, operators with proven tracking systems can reduce contingency fuel to as low as 3%, though the final 30-minute reserve remains completely untouched. How do dispatchers safely achieve this level of precision? They rely on advanced planning software that processes live meteorological data, route-specific wind profiles, and real-time aircraft performance to build highly optimized fuel profiles. This digital approach replaces broad historical safety buffers with precise flight-specific calculations. To manage the risk of departing heavy, wide-body airframes like the Boeing 777, 787, and 767-400ER, are built with physical fuel dump systems. These systems provide a critical operational backstop, allowing crews to jettison excess weight rapidly if a mechanical emergency forces an immediate return. Ultimately, while modern data-driven planning tools improve the economic compromise for most flights, they can never entirely erase the inherent risks of a rare, early return landing. Subscribe for more technical insights into modern aviation. Behind every digital flight plan lies a systems problem, not a cockpit vulnerability. The tension manifests as economic pressure upstream, where software-driven price incentives nudge planners toward cheaper uplift decisions. Yet the final safety check remains human. Captains retain absolute discretion to add fuel beyond the legal minimum whenever weather, traffic, or simple unease warrants a wider margin. How can optimizing fuel to the exact kilogram be judged cleanly when the alternative carries a potential body count? Safety is not found in a full tank, but in this operational buffer. Subscribe for more technical insights into modern aviation. How will tomorrow's technology refine these margins? High-resolution satellite weather modeling and AI-driven turbulence forecasting are already allowing dispatchers to safely reduce contingency reserves down to 3%. Yet, alternative fuels introduce new variables. Sustainable aviation fuel possesses a slightly lower energy density of 0.78 kilograms per liter compared to traditional Jet A1 at 0.80. To match a conventional flight profile, dispatchers must plan for a heavier fuel mass, altering the weight and payload envelope. Ultimately, even as data shrinks operational uncertainty, the physical laws of mass, structural landing limits, and reserve floors remain absolute. Today, every dispatch release represents a high-stakes calculation where carrying excess fuel is not safety, but liability. As climate targets and algorithmic modeling tighten these margins, aviation continues to prove that flight safety is found in absolute mathematical precision, not abundance. To explore the hidden engineering of modern industries, subscribe for more.